Stuxnet. Probably one of the most advanced malware infections that the world has ever seen. This is one beautiful piece of malicious code, and during its peak, it actually infected between 100,000 and 300,000 systems. Though as we'll see, this is not really its main objective. The story behind the discovery of Stuxnet is extremely interesting, and is almost a legend in itself. We've seen strains of Stuxnet all the way back to 2009. However, it was first discovered in 2010 by a very small antivirus provider called VirusBlockAda. Sergey Lassain, a developer and leader at the firm, received a call from one of his clients based out of Iran. The client said that several of their systems were throwing up blue screens of death, and the systems crashed even after a fresh install, which is one of the first signs of a persistent virus infection. When he got back to work that week, Lassain connected to his client's network and began poking around. He quickly found a program that was doing its best to stay hidden, and saw something interesting. This software was digitally signed by a reputable company. This was startling because it meant that the software could silently install itself on any system without needing permission from the user. But again, very few companies can issue and sign their own software, and none of them would want to install malware in the user's systems. He poked around a little and made another startling discovery. The malware was exploiting a flaw in Windows in order to silently install itself onto systems. Lassain made his discovery public, and several vendors and researchers began to try their hand at analyzing it. A little while later, researchers discovered that Stuxnet was looking for the presence of some software created by Siemens called Step 7. Step 7 was used to manage production lines and display real-time data to an operator. But this software was used in hundreds if not thousands of production facilities around the world. So what was Stuxnet after? Another thing that they discovered, which was even more interesting, was that Stuxnet was 150,000 lines long. Though not the best measurement, when you compare this to the average phone app or a space shuttle at 400,000 lines, that's absolutely massive for a virus. Stuxnet spread through USB drives. It grew so quickly that at one point people were actually gluing the USB ports to prevent themselves from being attacked. Remember, no one actually knew what it was after. They just knew that there was an advanced threat on the loose and no one knew what it wanted or how to stop it. So let's get back on track. Once Stuxnet found a system with Step 7 installed, it looked for the presence of a programmable logic controller, or a PLC, that allowed the computer to interface with the actual production lines. It would then take over the PLCs and would look for another set of instructions. The manufacturer of the microchip had to belong to two very specific companies. If it did, it would then check to see if the rotation speed of the engines was between 807 and 1210 Hz, and only then would it actually execute its real payload. So think about it. We're talking about a very specific target here. In fact, semantic researchers came to the conclusion that Stuxnet was targeting uranium enrichment plants in Iran. This was further backed up by the fact that Iran temporarily shut down its plants while issuing a very vague public statement, and thus Stuxnet came to an end. Its aim was to destroy a large number of centrifuges in Iran, but it was never realized, or if it was, Iran's government was not very open about it. However, this still made Stuxnet one of the very first advanced persistent threats, and definitely the first one that attempted to cause physical damage. An interesting point that you may want to note here was that Stuxnet actually failed because of a bug in its code. The functions that were supposed to wipe all traces of its existence failed and resulted in its discovery. This is probably very upsetting for the developers and the backers of Stuxnet. Imagine the amount of money that they invested into it. Even by the lowest of zero-day prices, Stuxnet would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for just the intelligence and the cost to create and proliferate. Now let's compare this attack with our checklist. Stuxnet was definitely purposeful. It had a well-defined goal and did not aim to immediately damage a large number of systems. Next, it exhibited a very high level of risk tolerance. The aim with Stuxnet was to stay hidden until it infected a centrifuge controller and then begin to ruin it. In fact, even when it began to destroy the centrifuge, it continued its attempts to stay hidden by feeding the operator a stream of valid data, thus making it look okay. But it's fair to say that Stuxnet's main goal, that was to cause mass damage, was never actually realized. More than the monetary loss, having to rebuild the facility at Natanz would have set Iran's nuclear program back quite significantly. Next, Stuxnet was definitely capable of differentiating between short-term and long-term gains. With the extent that it spread, and coupled with the fact that it used 40 days, Stuxnet had the capability to make more than 100,000 systems a part of its botnet, if it had wanted to. But it didn't, because the creators were capable of differentiating between short and long-term gains. Being caught before it could actually destroy the centrifuges was probably not something that the creators wanted. Creative? Check. They managed to chain together an incredible set of attacks and a lot of intelligence in order to create that infection vector. Sophisticated? Check. Stuxnet used not one, not two, but 40 days. As Ran Levy, a researcher, put it, such an extravagant waste of resources is akin to tossing 4 heavy bombs in a building, when one would suffice to destroy the target. Stuxnet was an incredible feat of malware engineering. Stuxnet did not launch itself from multiple locations, and nor did it create artificially large volumes of traffic to any system, so I'm going to have to cross these two off. Fail. Finally, funding. Stuxnet used 40 days, used a lot of prior intelligence work. They knew the exact speed ranges for the centrifuges, and they also utilized a massive stable code base. This is expensive, and the intelligence work alone would have required capabilities more commonly possessed by nation states. Kaspersky created a website quite some time ago in which they create and maintain a timeline of all advanced persistent threats that we've seen, ranging from Stuxnet all the way to more advanced ones like Poseidon. Let's take a look.